Good afternoon. My name is Ruth Mattingly, and I'm the Senior Executive Officer at the Literacy and Numeracy Secretariat. On behalf of the Secretariat, I'd like to welcome you to our webcast this afternoon on differentiating instruction. Over the course of this school year, we've provided a range of webcasts to address the professional learning needs of educators across Ontario. We feel privileged to be working with school and board staff to improve student achievement. In order to ensure equity of outcome, it is essential that we address the diverse learning needs of all students across Ontario. We can only do this effectively by differentiating instruction. Differentiating instruction provides a variety of ways for all students to feel affirmed, challenged, and successful. Effective differentiation offers students opportunities to advance from their point of entry. A classroom environment that is differentiated and student-centered provides time for students to consolidate their thinking and share their ideas with others. It cultivates critical literacy skills that enable students to listen, question and agree or disagree as they build an understanding of themselves and the world around them. Each student brings different strengths and needs to the learning environment, and the skillful teacher builds on those strengths in order to help every child succeed. This afternoon's webcast will provide you with practical suggestions, opportunities for reflection, and visits to classrooms where differentiated instruction is having a positive impact on improving student achievement.
Differentiated instruction for me means that you put the faces on the data of individual students and you look at what their needs are, and then teachers have a wide repertoire of instructional strategies that can meet those individual students' needs.
It is our moral obligation to not only teach our programs, but to teach our students. And it is not only our obligation to teach our students, but to ensure that all our students learn. In that vein, we need to therefore differentiate what we are doing to meet the needs of individual students, as we know that all students are not the same. We need to manipulate the program in order to maximize the potential for all children to learn.
For me, as a system leader, I need to provide the professional development for teachers to understand what the strategies are and what the variety can be, in order that when one strategy doesn't work for children, they'll pull out other strategies and try them. Too often, we all as teachers have only one strategy, and when it doesn't work, we continue to use it. So I think we need that professional development to ensure that all teachers understand the wide variety of strategies out there, like graphic organizers and like the structure around effective group work, and have choices to match the student needs. And in our professional development, I think we need to include principals and teachers learning together, coming together in teams so that they can go back and work with teachers in the school, modeling through staff meetings or professional development days.
There's really three things we have to think about when we teach. The first is why. Why do we want kids to learn this kind of thing? Would you rather that your students communicated electronically with family and friends through email or chat rooms or blogs or multi-user domains or role-playing games or whatever your kids are doing, or that they use the internet to do research for school? The second is how. How do we want them engaged in this kind of learning? How do we want them to be enacting strategies? I like to ask this how question. Would you rather that a student be so involved in the life of a character or historical or mathematical figure or whatever, that the student used the character's experience to think with, or that the student became so involved with an author that the student began to try to write and think like the author? And then finally, what? What kind of content do we want them engaged with? What kind of text do we want them reading? Would you rather that your students read the newspaper every day or a novel once a month? Would you rather your kids read lots of Animorphs or Harry Potters or Sevens or Series of Unfortunate Events or other series books, or a very occasional recognized quality text like a Newbery winner? Now, there's a lot that we could discuss in talking about your responses to these things, but I just want to mention one thing. that I've been working in schools for 25 years, and I have never heard a really serious discussion about why we teach what we teach. In my school, we say things like, it's in the curriculum. It's on the state test. You know, that's the purpose. Research in cognition shows that without a purpose, you can't engage, you don't know what to attend to, you don't know what to remember. And in fact, if you see kids who highlight everything in a textbook, that's the problem. They don't know why they're doing it, what they should attend to, what they should remember. I've never heard a really serious discussion of how. How do we want kids to read? What kind of strategies do we want to use? How do we want them doing math? Or how do we want them doing social science or whatever? But every single day in my school, there's arguments about what. And I can tell you, if you were in my school and you wanted to get in big trouble, here's what you could do. You could teach the 7th grade book to your 6th graders, right? And they're coming after you. Now, what's very interesting about that is that reveals a theoretical position that cannot be justified, which is that you're teaching what? So if you're angry because a 6th grade teacher read the book you typically do with your 7th graders, basically you're saying, I teach books, I teach text, I teach stuff, and you stole my stuff, so now I can't do it. But if you felt that you were teaching purposes or procedures, the why or the how, and somebody read your book, you'd go, great. Now I can read it again with the kids, and they already know the content. Now I can extend their procedural and purposeful understandings. But that rarely happens in school because we think we're teaching what, not why or how. Now when we start thinking about differentiation, if you're teaching all the kids the same stuff, the same text, the same what, you're going to have trouble differentiating. It can be done, but you're going to have a much bigger challenge. If you believe that what you're teaching is why or how, and by the way, in cognitive science, it's been shown over and over again that if you teach what, you usually don't teach the how and the why. If you teach the how and the why, you have to teach the what. Because you can't teach kids new strategies without the content that rewards those strategies, or the strategies that are required for that kind of content. So if you teach the how and focus on that and say that's what you're doing, you're going to get the what. Now when you teach the why and the how, you can start differentiating instruction very, very easily. All right, what we're going to do today is I'm going to model a technique called thinking aloud, or protocols. And I'm going to do that with an emphasis on differentiation of instruction. Now, when you teach, if you're teaching how, if you're teaching strategies, if you're teaching procedures, you use this model, which I proposed in my book, Strategic Reading, which is really a Vygotskian model, an assistance given to kids. I see a lot of you nodding out there. Assistance that is given to kids in the context of a task that will help them to do something they couldn't do without the assistance. That's what we'd call teaching. Now, in this model, you start with I do as the teacher, and you as the students watch me. I take off the top of my head. I'm modeling. Vygotsky said that modeling is the tool of tools, that you must demonstrate for your students how to do things. Now, when you model, the kids are dependent because you're showing them how to do something new that they don't yet know how to do. And you're showing them, you're taking it off the top of your head and showing them your expertise so they can appropriate it, borrow it, start to use it on their own. The second step is I do as the teacher, and you help me do it. This is called collaborative productive activity or joint productive activity, where I'm doing the same task after I've modeled it, and now I invite you to take over the parts that you can do. You know, this is how apprenticeship works in trades. You know, and if you're an electrician and you have an apprentice, you do the task and the apprentice watches. Pretty quick, you're going to do the task and have them do the parts that they could do, helping you out. Eventually, you get your apprentices to do it together. Same thing in a classroom. You get students to do the task together, and you help them as needed. That's called gradual release of responsibility. And then finally, the students do it alone. That's called independence, and you assess or help as needed. In the boys' study that I did with Michael Smith, a pretty typical complaint among the boys was teachers give you hard things to do and then they don't help you. When you teach, You got to give kids hard things to do and then assist them to do it. Now, if I use this model, I can differentiate in many different ways. Because first of all, if I'm teaching a procedure, like let's say reading for symbols, or if I'm doing an inquiry, say, what are civil rights and how do you protect them? It doesn't matter what content the kids are using as long as it applies. So I can be using picture books for some kids, and short stories for others, and harder text for still other kids. So I can get differentiation on the content, and yet everybody's still involved in the common project of meeting that procedural or conceptual goal. Another thing I can do to differentiate is, let's say I'm teaching something like making inferences or understanding some deep concept like, what are civil rights and how do you protect them? Then what I can do is I can be modeling for the kids who need it. I'll have other kids who I can be working with and they help me. I might have groups of kids working together. I'll get around to them when I can and help them. And I'll have other kids who can do it alone, and I'll give them harder text, more sophisticated challenges that they can be doing on their own. So I can get differentiation on each one of these 4 levels when I'm teaching by giving kids different levels of assistance. Now let's say that I believe as a teacher that my 7th graders, I teach 7th grade right now, have to know how to read symbols at the end of the year. They've got to know that. Then I got to make sure everybody gets it. And different kids are going to need different levels of assistance. So I have to make sure I stick with it till every kid has it. Let's say I don't think that's important. Well, then don't do it. Maybe you'll say the important thing is that they can read for main ideas and use ideas in the text to justify that. Great. Then that's what I got to teach them how to do, and I got to make sure I don't give up on any kid until he's got it. And that's what happens in school. We mention stuff instead of taking kids through the process to deep understanding. And we just assign, we evaluate, and then we quit. And if a kid didn't get it, we don't do what's necessary to helping them get it. And maybe they just know the information. And as we know from the research base going back to the 1940s with Ralph Tyler, that you can learn something on a test and regurgitate it for a test, and you forget almost all of it, about 98% within 2 weeks. But if you know how to do something, you tend to remember that for sometimes forever. Certainly the research shows that after 2 years, you still know the procedure and you still know the content.
We need to get to know our students. We need to know what their needs are. And many teachers ask the questions, well, how do you get to know them beyond the assessment and beyond the data, which are very critical in knowing what the students can do. But in getting to know who our students are, we need to get to know their communities. We need to get to know their likes, their dislikes, their talents. Asa Hilliard talks about the fact that every child possesses genius, and it is incumbent upon us to find out what that genius is. And to do so, we need to ensure that within the classroom we give children many opportunities to demonstrate their skills, to demonstrate their talents, their interests, and their genius. We also need to get to know their communities and the communities from which they come, what they bring to the classroom. And to do that, there are a number of different recommendations that can be made. Among them, there's a teacher that I know who does a community walk with her students at the beginning of the year as a part of a community unit. And what she does is she will go to different areas of the communities with the students, and they get to describe what happens there, what they do, what their likes and their dislikes are, so that the teacher gets to know what the student is coming from, but it also validates for the student that their community is important. Another way to get to know a child's community or the community of the students is to have a community bulletin board that can be changed whether weekly or monthly. And the children are able to contribute to that community bulletin board, bringing items about events or things that have happened or will be happening. Again, it's a validation, an opportunity to validate what happens in the child's community and their lives, but it also gives rise to relevant communication, relevant discussion within the classroom. One final suggestion that I put forward today in regards to getting to know the children, their communities, and their experiences is the community circle that is used in many, many classrooms. This is an opportunity for children to use their voices, to share their experiences, and it is also a very key opportunity to build on the whole oral language skill. So through guided questions and through open-ended questions, children will get to not only share specific scientific information, but they'll also get to validate, to share their excitement about specific things and to share concerns. It also gives other children an opportunity to voice some of their opinions about the things that may be happening, whether it be in their school or in their community at large. Another key piece in getting to know students very well is communication with parents, communication with the students themselves. Through communication with parents, language issues need to be considered significantly. Teachers and principals need to ensure that there is ample communication or ample ways of communicating with parents who speak different languages. So that might mean translating newsletters, making sure that parents know that translators are available to them upon request. It might mean continual phone calls. It might mean positive phone calls, because the whole issue of engaging parents comes through positive interactions, so that when there are issues and concerns that need to be discussed, a positive foundation has been laid. In terms of involving and engaging parents, opportunities for parents to become a part of the classroom is very critical. It reduces the alienation and scariness of what a classroom or a school is like. And so when teachers not only invite parents to be volunteers, but also invite them to do a one-day activity, whether it be go on a school trip, something that is a safe activity to do, engaging parents in presenting their own professions or their own experiences in the classroom as an invited guest. That, again, validates the experiences of the child, but it also brings a different voice to the classroom, and it gives the parents an open and safe invitation to become engaged in the activities of the classroom.
English language learners are students in Ontario English language schools whose home language is other than English, and it may be a language completely unrelated to English, such as Ojibwe or Cantonese, or it could be a language that's very closely related to English, such as Swedish or Jamaican Creole. But these students may be Canadian-born, or they may be newcomers, and in fact increasing numbers of these children are Canadian-born, and when they arrive in school in kindergarten or grade 1, they have their first major exposure to English and also to a new cultural environment. Some of these students may receive ESL, English as a Second Language, or ELD, English Literacy Development Instruction or Support, for the first few years in an Ontario school, depending on where they are and what kind of support is available. But many children, especially those who enter in kindergarten, never really receive any direct support from an ESL or ELD teacher, which really places an expectation on classroom teachers that they are able to support these students and help them to learn the language of instruction. One of the problems we sometimes have is that teachers are not always aware of who these students are in their classrooms. They may sound very fluent, very confident. They may have a Canadian accent, because young children do acquire a Canadian accent very quickly. And if they are newcomers and arrive before the age of 11 or 12, they also may sound quite convincing and quite competent in a very short amount of time. But in fact, they still need support in learning English, especially the more sophisticated grammatical structures and the vocabulary that's required for academic success. So one thing I always recommend that teachers do at the beginning of every year is to do a language survey of the class. This will give you a good sense of who has been in an English language environment for 5 years or less. I think it's a really good idea to do this for two reasons. One is that you will get to know who the English language learners might be in your classroom. And second, it highlights the fact that linguistic diversity is normal, something to be interested in. It's not a problem. It's a fact of life in Ontario schools and indeed in the world.
I'm going to speak about how to support our special education students. And in doing that, I'd like to frame it around 4 shared beliefs and understandings we have about teaching and learning, and also supporting our neediest learners. So the first shared belief and understanding that is absolutely critical is that we all believe that all students can learn given time and support. And for us, this is, as teachers, this is extremely challenging, but absolutely imperative that in all that we do in classrooms and schools, we are inclusive and we consider the learning environment and needs of our neediest students. As I talk about that, it brings to mind our second shared belief and understanding, and that is that teachers can teach to high expectations given the conditions for success. And to me, for teachers to support all students, we need to develop a systematic professional development program for them. And this includes how to use data to drive instruction. And using data on an ongoing diagnostic and formative basis really helps teachers develop strategies that work for students. Strategies that work include teachers having a vast repertoire of instructional strategies that work for different students at different times. It's important for teachers to understand how data today is teaching and learning tomorrow. And in saying that, teachers have to be expert in assessing the information they have on an ongoing basis, and then looking at strategies for individual and small groups of children. And this reminds me that we have to think about our classrooms and how our classrooms look in supporting our neediest learners. Teachers need to consider where our neediest learners sit if they have access to teachers. Teachers need to consider how to chunk the information for students in small, manageable chunks for their learning. Teachers need to consider visual information for students, because many of our students are visual and auditory learners. So information needs to be around the room, displayed in various modalities for students. And we need to consider how to integrate technology for our neediest students seamlessly into every school day. And when I also think about classroom teaching and learning, it reminds me that visual organizers and graphic organizers are very important for all of our students. Not only to use independently, but in those effective small groups where students learn from each other and talk together about what they know and what they need to know more about in our teaching. Our third shared belief and understanding that's really critical for us to think about and reflect on in supporting our neediest learners is that all of us need high expectations for all students, and we need early intervention as well. When I think about high expectations, I also think that we need a consideration for the resources that we have in our classroom. We need to have lots of visual material, anchor charts. We need to think about resources for our boys and for our girls. We need to think about boys who love action nonfiction books and girls who often love fiction books about animals, horses, for example. So there's a wide variety of texts that we need in our classroom at various levels so that students do have the resources and support for their learning. In looking at our fourth and final shared belief and understanding, I believe that teachers need to clearly articulate what they do and how they do it. This is very helpful in terms of the importance of collaborative learning teachers embark on together. And it's also very important to be able, as teachers, to clearly articulate what they're doing and why they're doing for parents, for caregivers, for extended family members, and for the broader community. Teachers need to be able to share with parents and caregivers why they're doing what they're doing and what their students in their care need more of in order to succeed. Because together we become a learning community that supports our neediest learners.
Now what we're going to do is we're going to do a think aloud here. As I've already said, I typed the last chapter on the right, and I have lines on the left. The reason I do this is because I want my kids to know that when you read anything, and this is true in math or science or whatever you teach, you have to pay attention to the text. There's an author who wrote the text, and they're trying to communicate something to you, whether it's information or a literary experience or whatever. So you have to pay attention to that text. You've got to give it respect. But you also got to do something over here. You've got to converse with the text. Transactional reader response theory, authorial response, the recent research in cognition and comprehension and engagement shows that's true. That if you don't converse with the text, you're not reading. So I tell the kids, you got to be responding. You got to be asking questions. You got to be summarizing. You got to be doing a lot of these things that expert readers do, or you're not conversing with the text. So we have to have this side filled out and this side filled out. Now, you're really good readers. So what will happen is you'll start getting into the story, and you'll just blast on. So that's why at the bottom of every page I remind you. And I say, if you didn't write anything down, go back and write down some of the things you were thinking, feeling, noticing, doing as you read. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this I do, you watch about how to do a think aloud. And then I'm going to move directly to the you do it alone, and I'll come around, check out how you're doing. The reason I'm going to do that is because I'm not teaching you anything new with this technique. It's a free response, think aloud. And the reason I do this, I only do it a couple times a year, but I'm doing it to see what you do as readers. So as my students, I need to get a bead. Okay, how do you work? What kind of things do you do as a reader? What do you not do as a reader? Because then I can differentiate instruction for you. I can gear my instruction to what you need. I can build from your strengths, which I now know, to address the things you don't yet do. I might do it again at the end of the year. And I have the kids code these, like write down a question mark where you ask a question. I'll have them code the types of questions they ask. And we can look at what expert readers do and what they did and what they didn't do. And so they can name what they've learned and what they need to learn. And at the end of the year, when they do this again, they'll be able to name their own progress. So that's a very, very powerful thing for them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take off the top of my head, I'm going to model for about a page and a half, then I'm going to have you do the rest of this on your own. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come around and see what you're doing, and I'm going to tell you what I learned about you that I could use if I were your teacher. All right? Okay. So free response protocol, no editing, anything that's in your mind as you're reading. Number the Stars by Lois Lowry. Now the first thing I remind myself in the last chapter is that titles are important. And one of the interesting things about literature is that the meaning of a title is often not revealed until the end. Now, I know that the stars are the Jewish people in the story, but I don't know how they're numbered. So I want to pay attention to that in this last chapter. The war would end. Uncle Henrik had said that, and it was true. The war ended almost 2 long years later. Anne-Marie was 12. Now, the first thing I notice as a reader is that the author has announced to me that there's a 2-year gap between the end of the last chapter and this chapter. Now, I'm assuming it's more of the same, but I still have to fill in that gap. I'm assuming that the Nazis are still there, and that the food shortages are still there, and the oppression is still there, etc. Now, I'm also doing this kind of math problem in my head because I'm thinking, Anne-Marie's 12. She was 6 or 7 when the Nazis occupied Denmark. That's been half of her life. And I'm thinking about kids in oppressive situations that they don't know are going to end, and I'm feeling very empathetic for someone like Anne-Marie who's in an oppressive situation that she does not know is going to end. I mean, not only is that half of her life, that's probably most of her life that she remembers. And I'm also making a personal connection because I remember when I was 12 and I broke my leg and I had this big cast on it, and I thought that thing was never coming off, even though I knew it was. And so I'm wondering, how much worse is it for a kid who doesn't know that the difficulties they're suffering are going to end? Church bells rang all over Copenhagen early that evening. Now, as soon as that is said, I hear the church bells. I've taught in Europe. I know what it's like when all those church bells ring. May evening, I feel like I'm near the Tivoli Gardens. I've been to Copenhagen. And I'm walking by. I see the flowers. I see the sun setting through the trees. I feel like I'm in my shirt sleeve. It's a warm day. Now, I'm going to stop right there. But I hope you get the idea. Now, after you're done finishing this, I'm going to ask you these questions. Characterize how you read this excerpt. Was it visual? Was it like seeing a movie in your mind? Did you ask a lot of questions? Was it participatory? And I want you to be general. Now, if I was to answer that question about what I just read to you, I would say that number one, it went beyond visual. It was synesthetic. You know, I heard things, I felt things emotionally as well as saw things. And it was also participatory. I mean, I felt I was an unmentioned character, and any time there was a scene change, I went to that scene change. I was in that place. Then I want you to identify some of the strategies or characteristic moves you used. And I want you to be very specific. Now, I call them moves in my classroom because I work with really reluctant kids, and they think that reading is just decoding words. And I tell them, no, reading is participation. Reading is a transaction. When you're reading, you got to make the moves. You got to be in there doing stuff. So I call them moves. Now, what are some moves I made? Well, one thing was whenever there was a new setting on the balcony, in the apartment, I felt like I was there. I immediately put myself there. Now, how did I do that? Well, I've been on balconies before. I've been in apartments before, so I can imagine what it would be like. Another thing that I did was that, you know, I felt a lot of things by making personal connections. So when it says Anne Marie is 12, I remember when I was 12 and had a broken leg. When it says they're in Copenhagen, I remembered being in Copenhagen. Now, your kids are unlikely to have been in Copenhagen, but you could help them visualize Copenhagen by showing them some pictures off the internet of maybe the town square or the Tivoli Gardens, and they'd get a sense, and that would help them to visualize that particular place. How did these moves help you make meaning? Well, I felt like I was there. I was living through everything with the characters. I'm suffering the same emotions that they are. So it really involves me. And another thing is I can create this whole story world by using the visual information from my life and applying it to the visual cues in the text. All right, so this is what we're up to. I'm going to give you about 8 minutes, and I want you to read the rest of this text. So I want you to go through and write down anything you're thinking, feeling, noticing, doing as you read. Now, a lot of you have never read this text before. It'll be a little harder for you than other people, but that's okay, because it's going to make one of my points for me. I often allow my kids to draw pictures of things they're seeing or feeling or doing as they read. I call it a visual protocol. If you're so moved to do that, do that. When I allow my kids to do that, about 70% of them do draw pictures of some kind. You might even, if you get done before the people around you, draw a picture of something that was, you know, very particularly meaningful to you in the text, or maybe a picture of what you think this text means or whatever. That'd be great. So that's what you're up to. At the end of 8 minutes, I'm going to stop you, and I'm going to set up another activity. Any questions what you're doing? All right, good luck. Write down everything you're thinking, feeling, noticing, doing, and you're thinking about. If you get to the bottom of the page and haven't written anything, go back and write some stuff. All right, what I'm going to have you do right now is what I have the kids do in my classroom. So I ask them these same questions. And I just want you to take 1 minute and think about this before I pair you up with somebody else. How would you describe, in general, how you read this? Was it like seeing a movie in your mind? Was it a list of questions? Was it an emotional transcript? Whatever. So generally describe it. And then I want you to pick out a couple specific moves or strategies that you used that'd be interesting to talk about. Because I'd like you to identify those strategies and how they helped you comprehend or make meaning. Now, what I want you to do in your pair is I want you to please, before you do anything else, share how you read. So do that generally, talk about a couple strategies, talk about how they helped you engage and make meaning. Now, I'm going to do what I do in my classroom. I'm going to come around with a notepad, and I'm going to write down what I hear you saying. And when we're done, I'm going to tell you what I learned about you as people and readers that would help me teach you if you were my students. Okay? So partner up and go for it. I gave you 10 minutes. And even though it's the end of the day and you're tired and it's February and you've been working hard, almost every group was still going pretty strong at the end of 10 minutes. Now this is why. Because there's something we share with kids that's especially true of them, but it's true of all human beings. And that's that we're all intensely self-interested. Right? You can admit it. And what you were doing here is talking about how you read. Right? So you're talking about yourself. You're staking your identity. Now there's a benefit to this. You can't be wrong. You get an A+, 100%, no matter how badly you read. Because what I asked was, report out about how you read. How many times does that happen in school where you get 100% if you do it? Okay, so there's a big payoff for that. Another thing that's interesting is that research on classroom discourse shows that about 80% of the talk in a classroom is the teacher. And the 20% that the kids do is often off task. If it's on task, it's basically filling in the blanks in the teacher's lecture. So it's not a substantive contribution. What you were doing here is you talked for 10 minutes in pairs. So we got, what, 20 people here or so? So we had 20 times 10, 200 minutes of talk, of student talk. And the talk was about how you read. In studies that try to code talk about how we do things or how we problem solve, they can't find enough stuff to code in the studies. It never happens in schools. The kids who most need that are the kids who struggle the most because they're the least like you. They don't know what they're supposed to be doing when they're reading. And if you don't help them to know that by talking about it, taking off the top of your head, and get them to talk about it, they're not going to be able to do it. So this procedural talk was very, very powerful. Now, as I walked around, I learned a lot of stuff about you guys as people and as readers. The first thing I heard as you guys were talking was that one of you said it was like just questions for me, and then I would search for the answers. I would ask questions, I would search for the answers. Somebody said, "Who the heck was Peter?" And the other people were trying to help him out. Somebody over here was drawing like a little family tree to figure out what are the relationships of the characters. That's an expert technique. You know, if I were your teacher, I would say, look what Joe did. He made a little chart of the characters and their relationships. That's a great thing you can do to see relationships between ideas or people in any kind of text you're reading. And I could model that and use you as the expert. Somebody else over here was saying it was visualization, that I really visualized. In fact, somebody said, I didn't realize I visualized. Now I do. Somebody said it was like a movie in their mind. In fact, somebody said this was like watching Schindler's List, which was black and white with only the one colored thing, the yellow dress. And in Schindler's List, what was the red coat, I think? Now I know, if you're my student, that you've seen Schindler's List. I could ask you to do a little movie talk about it. Or maybe I could set up a video club where kids would go and watch different movies about this time period. So there was a lot of things I learned about you personally and as readers that I could use now to teach you better.
So in terms of looking at some high-yield strategies when we're speaking about differentiated instruction, particularly for children who live in poverty, for visible minority students such as black students, looking at some of these differentiated strategies for Aboriginal students, I want to look at three specific areas. One area is the key. It's the high expectations area. We often look through research, we see in research the fact that high expectations for performance and for student success is a key to developing and facilitating that success. High expectations come out of the assumption that all students can learn. And when we assume that as educators, we need to ensure that we articulate that assumption and demonstrate that assumption in the things that we do and the things that we say. It's manifested in the classroom through the way that not only we validate students, but also when we speak to students about their work. You know, Bobby, you did a really fantastic job with that last week. And I'm seeing that you're having a difficulty with this week. How can we help you to get to where you were before? Or I know that you are going to be able to excel at this. What else can we do to ensure that you get this? So always articulating your guidance of children with the assumption of their greatness. And again, going back to the assumption of their genius. Lisa Delpit talks about presenting the curriculum in a challenging manner, talking about when we are looking at children who live in poverty or children who have faced a variety of challenging circumstances coming to school. She talks about the fact that it's very important that we not water down the curriculum, but that we in fact enrich the curriculum, because with those particular students, you need to teach more. And when we talk about teaching more, we're not just talking about teaching more content, but more teaching needs to happen. And so in terms of working with students who have challenging circumstances that they bring to school, we talk about offering more opportunities for success, perhaps around the same item. We might talk about giving them different ways of demonstrating their understanding. Perhaps a student may not be a strong writer, but has a very key understanding for a social studies concept. And so giving that child an opportunity to make a delivery of their understanding through an oral presentation, through an artistic presentation, through a musical presentation, allows that child to participate and engage and demonstrate that they are capable and genius at that particular area, while you work on developing the other skills that they're having difficulty with. In this way, you engage the students, you differentiate the assessment process, you differentiate the learning process, while at the same time acknowledging the needs of the child and working with those needs. Offering children leadership opportunities is an act of trust, and it is an act of trust that is based on the assumption of excellence and the assumption of genius. So leadership opportunities that might be different from the usual. We have the usual peer helpers and classroom leaders and those kinds of things. And I think that as teachers get to know their children, they know what their talents are and perhaps are able to direct and mentor their children into a leadership opportunity that may not be as obvious. Looking for an opportunity, a leadership opportunity within the area of sports or within the area of working with younger children, interpersonal things. Maybe a child is very introverted and a leadership opportunity in the office, assisting the secretary. Things of that nature engage the student and essentially validate that I know that you have really excellent skills and I'm going to give you opportunities to be able to demonstrate those skills outside of the classroom. The other piece around expectations for excellence would be articulating the expectations for their future. Many times teachers will speak with children, you know, you speak so well, I bet one day you are going to be an excellent lawyer, politician, teacher, but bringing those ideas into the classroom that children are able to see that you see a fabulous future for them based on their genius, even though that future may not be self-evident at the moment. And helping children to express an interest and to explore those possibilities, because having children have hope for what they can do is a very key piece to engaging them in what they need to do now. Leading from high expectations is the piece around mentorship, which is a critical piece when we're working with students who have been marginalized in the past or who do face challenging circumstances. Those children may not always have clear role models or clear mentors at home or in the community. And so their teachers and their school staffs become very important in terms of the messaging that comes to them. When an adult in the school takes a particular interest in a child, talks to them about the excellence that they see, the potential that they see, and not only talks to children through that, but guides them through that. If we say to a student, you know, I really see that you could really learn chess really well, and I play chess. I'm going to teach you the game. I'm going to teach you so that you can join the chess club and be a part of the chess club and engage in that. Or engaging a child in the math contest or the math teams, engaging a child in the debate teams. And many children, particularly if they come from challenging situations, may not choose to go that route out of their own volition. They might not even think of it as a possibility, but through the mentorship of a teacher, they may become engaged in those opportunities, and success builds upon success. Inclusion in the curriculum is another key piece to differentiated instruction. It's really important that children see their circumstances, their realities reflected in what they're learning in order to engage them in that learning. And we can speak about the obvious in terms of language and religious and ethnocultural evidence and examples within the books that we choose and the people that we bring into the school. But one piece that is often neglected is the piece around children who live in poverty, children who live in circumstances that are difficult, and validating those through our materials and presentation and manner of instruction is also very important. And it's important for children to have pride in whatever it is, the circumstances that they come from. And so us validating those kinds of circumstances within our classroom goes a long way to engage the student and to bring the student forward, to develop a trust in the classroom that all of our realities are important and wonderful, and in as much as there may be difficulties, who I am as a person is an excellent person, and it's important. My presence and my value is important in the classroom. So when we are looking at our tools, when we're looking at our materials, when we're inviting people into the classrooms, those people need to represent our students in a variety of ways, and the materials need to represent our students, but the messages that come out of those engagements must also represent our students and validate their realities. One piece that is often talked about when we talk about differentiated instruction and instruction for children in different circumstances is direct teaching. A number of researchers talk about the importance of direct teaching and ensuring that we don't make assumptions about what children already know. We do know that children come with knowledge. They come with the knowledge of their communities. They come with the knowledge of their experiences and their realities. And we need to build on that knowledge. But there are times when we need to build explicitly on that. And so we may want to teach children how to engage in a group dynamic. When we're doing group work, we can't assume that all the children will arrive with the skills for engaging in group work effectively, because in their environments that may not be a part of their reality. And so we need to ensure that we give all the children the tools to meet the expectations that we have. That might even mean teaching them how to play. Teaching them how to play in the schoolyard, teaching them how to resolve conflicts within their social structures, within the yard, or with other staff in the school. We might need to teach them the skills of audience. If they're going to be listening to an oral presentation, how does an audience behave? And we need to give the children practice. Teaching the skills once to children who have never experienced these kinds of opportunities may not be effective enough. We need to ensure that we continue to give them practice to demonstrate these skills, to ensure that we encourage them and remind them around the expectations for the demonstration of these skills.
I'd like to talk now about some strategies for teaching this kind of vocabulary and expanding the vocabulary of English language learners, and actually of all learners. Many of these strategies will be equally helpful to English language learners. A strong focus on vocabulary is going to help all students with reading comprehension. Vocabulary knowledge is the biggest predictor of success in reading comprehension. First of all, an applied linguist from the United States, Stephen Krashen, tells us that extensive reading is the best way for children to acquire vocabulary and also to expand their understanding of English language sentence structure. By extensive reading, he means children reading material of their own choice, reading material at their present level or very slightly above, in order to expand their vocabulary and to learn how to love reading. It might be fiction or non-fiction. It won't necessarily be high-quality children's literature. It might be, or it might not. And in the case of English language learners, what's important here is volume, that the children read a lot and every day, and that they read material that's accessible to them. I'd like to suggest that teachers consider using graded readers designed for English language learners. Graded readers are similar in concept to leveled books, but they're leveled differently. They're leveled according to the number of words a child has to know in order to be able to understand them, and they're also graded in terms of the complexity of the sentence structure. So at the very earliest levels, for example, the material in graded readers might use only the first 750 words that an English language learner would learn actually before even arriving at school. So they would have a 750 word vocabulary demand, and they would use very simple, straightforward sentences and lots of visual material. They might be fiction and they might be non-fiction. And they are available then at the 1,000 word level, 1,500 word level, and so on. And children can really get a sense that they're moving along the continuum when they use these readers. You can also use leveled readers, but you might have to choose several levels below what you might expect for an English-speaking child of the same age, because remember, the children I'm talking about haven't got the same access to English, haven't had the same access to English, and have not yet acquired the same vocabulary level or sentence structure of their English-speaking peers. I'd also like to suggest that teachers focus on new words as they arise in the curriculum, and focus on those general purpose words like observe and observer, so that children expand their vocabulary of these all-purpose academic words. And when you focus on a new word, let the students encounter it in context, or sometimes you might want to pre-teach the word. And when you introduce a word, please say it and write it, even say it 2 times and write it. And by all means have students repeat the word. This is especially important for words like observe, observer, observation, where the stress changes as we add suffixes onto the end of a word. The stress moves. So we have observe, observer, but observation. The stress has shifted. And that's extremely challenging for students from other language backgrounds who may not have this feature in their own language. In fact, some languages don't have suffixes at all. You cannot change a word by adding something on the end or putting something on the beginning. And this can be quite challenging for students who sometimes really can't even notice or hear the difference at first between words like observe and observer. So write the word, say it, and use some choral repetition so that children can recognize the word and pronounce it themselves. I'd like to show you now a word wall that's been devised specifically for English language learners, but I think would be helpful for all students. This word wall shows the top 10 words that a teacher has selected from that same unit on rocks and minerals. And she's limited her selection to 10 words because that's probably the maximum most children will be able to focus on and learn within 2 or 3 days. And they are all of the same type. They are all these very useful but general academic words. You see the word igneous is not on that list because igneous is not useful enough across the curriculum, and to add it would simply overload the students with words, not all of which would be so helpful. So you see we have the words categorized according to verbs, nouns, adjectives. It's really important to teach these terms. Students from grade 3, certainly from grade 4 and up, are quite able to understand these concepts. Perhaps not if we teach them abstractly. For example, a definition such as a noun is a person, place, or thing is not always very helpful. For example, life is not a person, place, or thing, but it's definitely a noun. So it might be better to teach by example, to show students examples of nouns of different kinds in various sentences, preferably sentences that they are using within the context of the unit that they're studying. So we need to teach children these concepts, verbs, nouns, and so on. And you'll see that this is just a list of 2 or 3 words from a list of 10. And the first word that we've chosen is form. And we've got form and formation. And you'll see the underlining shows which syllable is stressed. So form, formation, formal, inform, reform, deform, showing where the stress is, showing the related words, helping children to see that there's a part of this word that carries a lot of meaning. The form part means shape. And when they encounter other words that use this root, they will be able to make some good guesses about what this word actually means. And then the examples are taken directly from the context in which they're working. This book gives a lot of information about rock formation in different locations in Canada. And locations is an example for the word location. And we're teaching them that LOC has to do with place. So we can talk with them about, have you ever dislocated your shoulder, for example, to help them to see different forms of the words and different uses of the words. And you'll see that the third word on the list is geology and geologist. And again, we're teaching children a very useful root. We can also come back to this list at some later time and look at some of the suffixes. So we could look, for example, at the suffix ist and ask children what other words they know that end in ist, and they might come up with dentist or artist. And then you can ask children, well, can you make a guess then about what this usually means on the end of the word? And they probably will figure out that the suffix ist usually has something to do with some kind of expert person, someone who does a certain job or is very knowledgeable in a certain area. And that's a very useful generalization to have about the language as well. I'd like finally to show you an example of how teachers can model vocabulary acquisition strategies so that children not only can learn words that the teacher has focused on, but can also, in their own independent reading, can figure out the meanings of new words, at least in a general enough way that will allow them to keep on reading. And the word I've chosen to focus on, you might look at this word and figure out that it has something to do with measuring, and you can invite children to do that, and you can think aloud and say, well, this word nilometer might be something to do with measuring, because I do know the word thermometer, and that's something we use to measure heat. So a nilometer might be something to measure, and you can look at the word and point to the nil part of the word and say, well, maybe it's something to measure something very small, because we know that nil means, and you might actually get that from the students, it means nothing or it means 0. Okay, so that's a good guess. Nilometer might be something for measuring something very small. But now let's look at the context that we're reading about. We're reading about Egypt. Now look at the word again. What do you think nilometer might mean? And the children might actually come up with, well, it might be for measuring the Nile. And of course it is. It's a stick for measuring the depth of a Nile so that people knew when to plant their crops. So this is a useful way for showing students how to analyze a word using the parts of a word to figure out the meaning, but also to use context to check their understanding, that these two strategies are perhaps two of the most useful that they can use as independent readers. And it's a good idea to model this strategy many different times. Now, I would suggest that the word nilometer is not one of the words that goes on the word list, because it's a word that you probably only would use for 5 minutes. In fact, I can guess that many of you watching this broadcast didn't know the word nilometer, and you're none the worse for it. We need to set attainable expectations for English language learners. And in fact, the Ontario Curriculum Resource Guide for grades 1 to 8 for English as a second language and English literacy development suggests that children who are in the early stages of English will work towards alternative or modified expectations in the Ontario curriculum. The amount of adaptation or modification will decline over time as we see children moving closer and closer towards proficiency in English. But while they're working on an adapted curriculum, then evaluation must be based on the curriculum they're actually receiving, which may be different from the curriculum that their English-speaking grade peers are receiving. So we need to document that on the report card, and there is a mechanism for doing that using the ESL or ELD box and providing a comment that indicates to what extent the curriculum has been modified or adapted for this student. And if we're going to modify or adapt the curriculum, we really have to make sure that parents understand that the grade or the mark that their child has received is based on a curriculum that may not be exactly the same as the curriculum their peers are following right now, but that we do expect that they will catch up to their peers and they will eventually be working towards the same expectations as everybody else. Maybe not this year, maybe not even next year, but eventually.
Some of the most powerful strategies that teachers can use are, for example, concept attainment, effective group work, graphic organizers, and teachers need to become consciously skilled in using those strategies that match the needs of individual students or small groups of students. Students who work in groups and identify their needs and what they need to know more about in talking with other students and with the teachers is really highly effective in promoting the learning of all kids. And the last one I mentioned was graphic organizers. And that's, you know, fishbone and placemat and all those strategies that help kids organize their thoughts. And for our neediest learners, that's what they need to do most. They need to organize their thoughts and discuss with others to bring new learning to it. And you know, the process of teaching using graphic organizers helps that along. Another way of differentiating instruction is using leveled books in primary and junior classrooms, and looking at forming groups from the use of running records, for example, and using guided reading for small group instruction. So that to me differentiates the instruction, and no longer do we use whole group novel studies, for example, but indeed group children according to needs. I believe that social, emotional, and academic learning are essential for all of our students. We need to ensure that students are supported and safe in a nurturing learning environment. This only happens when we consider the social, emotional, and academic needs of all of our learners.
I tell you what, your job's pretty big. Get the kids to help you, particularly if they're going to learn things from each other that they won't learn from you, which I'm pretty compelled is the case. One of the things that we know that is widely agreed upon by reading researchers is that there are these general processes of reading. In other words, it's widely understood and known that anytime anybody successfully reads, they do these things. They activate background and set a purpose for reading. They decode the text into words. They ask questions. First literal ones, then more inferential, then more applicative ones. They summarize. They bring meaning forward. They understand that what they read earlier, or maybe even what they read from earlier in their life, has to be brought forward to comprehend what they're reading right now. They monitor understanding and self-correct. In fact, that's the most salient difference between good and poor readers. Good readers know when they're not getting it, and they have self-corrective strategies. Poor readers either give up or keep on doing the thing that doesn't make sense. Make predictions. Now, some reading theorists, including myself, would argue that you also have to personally connect to the content. Some people say that's the same thing as activating background. I think it's different and worthy of its own attention, that we have to connect the kids personally or they're not going to engage. Visualizing. When I did the You Gotta Be the Book studies, I found that nobody who didn't visualize could be said to comprehend. Even with nonfiction, you got to visualize or create a mental model in your mind. And reflect on meaning or consolidate knowledge. In other words, when you read, you got to add what you're now understanding to what you understood before. You got to accommodate or assimilate that in some way so that your understanding grows, is supported or changed. Now, let's say your kids don't do one of those things. That's what you should be teaching them. That is the biggest transfer value, because they're going to use it every time they read anything. Fortunately, textbooks over the last 10 years have become hip to these things, and you'll actually see them posted in libraries, you know, things all good readers do, etc. Here's the problem, though. Let's say your kids do all these things. That doesn't make them a good reader, because these are necessary but insufficient strategies to being a good reader. Every reader uses them every time they read, but that's not all expert readers do. There are other strategies that I would call, first of all, task-specific strategies. Strategies, conventions that are put into any kind of text, and you would have to notice, and you'd have to interpret whenever you see them. Now, symbolism is an example of that. Symbolism is used in advertisements. Symbolism is used in political discourse. Symbolism is used in literature. It's used in opinion pieces, etc. Unreliable narrators. True across all kinds of writing. Political discourse. You better be asking, how reliable is this narrator? Advertisement. You better ask that. Op-ed piece. Pretty much anything in the world is written by somebody who's trying to manipulate you. They want you to believe or know or do something. So you've got to ask, who wrote that? How reliable are they? There are also what I would call text-specific strategies. If you're reading an argument, you've got to do totally different things than if you're reading narrative. If you're reading a narrative with irony, you've got to do totally different things than if you're reading a straight narrative. If you're reading a classification or an embedded classification or an extended definition, you've got to do totally different things than if you're reading a different kind of text. Those are text or genre-specific strategies. This is why we have what's called the 4th and 5th grade reading slump, because teachers are very good in the early grades at teaching the basic things, and then they come up upon these new kinds of text. Because in elementary school, what do you read? Straight narrative all the time. And then all of a sudden you get 4th and 5th grade, there starts being textbooks, and you got embedded definition and classification and argument. And then all of a sudden the concepts get harder as well. And even the narrative gets subverted because there are unreliable narrators and symbolism and irony and unreliable narrators and all that kind of thing. And the kids don't get the help they need to read these more sophisticated kinds of text. In our boy study, boy after boy said things to us like, I used to be a good reader and then I got stupider. That didn't happen. The kids didn't get stupider. The text got harder and no teacher helped them to meet those new demands. Now, when I teach a strategy, I don't do a unit on a strategy. I don't do a unit on prediction or a unit on inferencing. I teach them at the point of need where we're reading something and they have to know that strategy. Because then the strategy is in service of our inquiry, of something that matters to the kids and that they are trying to understand. What's interesting about strategies like Think Alouds is that they're totally high yield. So we can demonstrate in the research that if you do this, if you spend the time on it, the kids will know how to do symbolism the next year and the year after that. They actually learn it. I was really pleased to see you have this new publication out of Ontario called Teach for Understanding. Well, that's what you're doing here. You're teaching them how to use a reading process, how to understand it in a way that they'll be able to transfer it forward. Now, there's a lot of strategies like this, visualization, drama, the Think Aloud, and they're very, very powerful because the kids come to understand what they need to do as expert readers and how to do it. And they get the assistance they need to go to independence. This is the cool thing about teaching kids how to use processes. If I'm just teaching what, I'm in trouble. I got to do all the work. I used to teach Great Gatsby, and I'd say to the kids, what's the symbol at the end of chapter 3? And they'd go, we don't know. And I'd have to tell them, right? It's the green line at the end of the dock, and it's symbolic of, the future, and he's got to go for it. And, and I had a kid say to me, Mr. Wilhelm, do you have like a secret decoder or symbol ring or something? And I was happy because I thought my job as a teacher was to know more than him. Now I know that's not my job. My job is to help them know what I know. And if you teach them what you know, then you'll have kids like this boy teaching me something I didn't notice about the book. And you know how kids love to do that? To make the teacher sweat and show something the teacher doesn't know. So you're giving them the expertise, and then they can make meaning on your own, and they can do things that you wouldn't be able to do because they have the power now and they have the strategy, which is your job to give over to them.
We want to thank you for joining us today for this webcast. We hope that you will share the webcast with colleagues and remind you that not only can you view this live, but also through video download at www.curriculum.org. On behalf of all of us here at the Secretariat, I want to thank you for your dedication and the fine work you are doing to ensure equity of outcome for all students and for ensuring that Ontario students receive the best possible education.